Today we shall be talking about some of Gothic literature's most famous books. It's almost Halloween, so I decided why not talk about one of the most important parts of this holiday, its stories and books we all know and love. Three of these books are well known and have had multiple reboots, retellings, and adaptations. Today we'll discuss first Dracula, next Frankenstein, and then finally The Invisible Man. I personally enjoy reading these around when October 1st begins to get into the holiday spirit. When you think of main Halloween monsters, what comes to mind? For me, it would be Dracula, who stars in our first book. Did you know Dracula wasn't the first big vampire book? The first was actually called The Vampire, which was written a few years prior. There have been several retellings of Dracula, but today we are going to be looking at the one that started it all. This one was written by Bram Stoker in 1897, and this book was written sort of like a journal. There were several POV changes throughout the book. It starts off with the unsuspecting Jonathan Harker visiting his client, Count Dracula. He would eventually find out who Dracula truly was, and this set off a series of unfortunate events, which led to Jonathan's girlfriend being roped in as well. The book itself is pretty long, but not a bad read, especially considering it's the start of a legendary franchise. This book shows that the good guy doesn't always win in the end. I think it aged pretty well compared to its counterparts from nowadays. Even vampires themselves, like the ones from Twilight, are a lot different from this Dracula. Alright, let's move on to our next main story of Halloween, which is Frankenstein. Many people tend to think that it was named after the Big Green Man, but in fact it was named after the scientist and creator Victor Frankenstein. The original book was written way back in 1918. Mary Shelley first created this story as part of a small competition of who can write the scariest story while she was stuck inside on a rainy day. The actual book starts off with a man being rescued, and he recounts the tale of a monster he accidentally unleashed into the world. It is a story of arrogance, devastation, and sadness. It sucks that Frank was misunderstood by the townspeople. They kind of had it coming, even though he was kind of a freak in the books. To be honest, I got kind of scared while reading it. Of course, the story changed over the years as many characters were added and taken out, so it's interesting to see how the original differs from a modern day retelling of Frankenstein. Okay, now we are arriving to our third and final story, which is my personal favorite. This one is called The Invisible Man and was written by H.G. Wells and published all the way back in 1897. The book itself starts off with a scientist who turned himself invisible and had arrived in a town after being on the run. Now that I think about it, a lot of these horror stories start off with a scientist who made a horrible mistake, funny enough. The townspeople didn't like him too much, and fast forward a bit, he gets in a few fights and has to retrieve his notes. He even has a sidekick, although that guy wasn't very useful. I won't spoil everything, but the ending has a bit of a twist. Multiple slasher movie characters like Jason were somewhat based off of The Invisible Man. This has to be one of my favorite horror books of all time, as I really enjoyed The Invisible Man's characters throughout the story. Overall, these three books are true classics, and I hope people continue to read and create even more stories for these characters in the future. I hope you all enjoy your Halloween, and maybe try getting lost in a scary book or two.